There is strikes daily on Yemen for its resistance to the Israeli occupation and its siege on Gaza. But Yemen still stands the same way that Iran, after almost a month of unjust aggression, was able to stand tall and is maintaining its national objectives to resisting imperialism.
But I warn you, anything you say now, of course you have Shane nearby. You can hit him over the head if he does something wrong. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today we're going to be talking about the Middle East and the conflict over there. And this has been a reoccurring topic on Fight Back Radio for the last couple of years, because this has been the center of the international conflict, the center and really the inspiration for peoples around the world fighting for national liberation and against U.S. imperialism. And we have the perfect guest today. We have Sara Mahmoud. And Sara is a Palestinian organizer who's been in the fight for the last decade. Sara was mobilized into action after the Chapel Hill shooting in February 2015, where 3 Muslim students were shot and killed. And later that year, with the killing of Sandra Bland, in the summer of 2017, Sara joined the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and helped found organizations in her hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, like the Jacksonville Community Action Committee, which we've had guests previously on to talk about police accountability in Jacksonville and nationally from that organization, and the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network, where she's the chair and also serves as the chair of their campaigns. She's a committed organizer and revolutionary, fighting for the liberation of all oppressed nations and people towards socialist revolution. So welcome to Fight Back Radio, Sara.
Thanks, Richard. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I want to start by, and I want to spend a little time, if we can, on Iran, which is, like so much with Trump, it was in the news, then it was out of the news, and back in again. And so, the Iran is, of course, been a country for many years. And I'm thinking especially, and it hasn't, right now it's the Islamic Republic of Iran, but before that you had the Shah of Iran and his father for decades, who were flunkies of U.S. imperialism. But in the early days, after World War II, when the current international order was being established, and nuclear weapons were relatively new, they established the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Iran joined it immediately almost, and has been a part of that. And this is an organization that regulates nuclear power. There's been inspections in Iran up to the present day of their nuclear power. They've always been found to be in compliance despite pressure from U.S. and parts in Northern Europe to have them say otherwise. And who's not been in line with international law has been Israel and the United States, which just bombed Iran. And so I was hoping, why don't we start with that? So what's actually happened and what led up to this conflict where, this is extreme, where Israel first and then the United States have bombed a sovereign country.
Right. I think you laid it out perfectly. So many folks, anybody in this country, right, or any Western country who has access to any type of media has heard the claims of an impending nuclear threat, right, that's been peddled by the mass and mainstream media, specifically in relation to Iran, to manufacture consent for for war, for sanctions. But it's fundamentally untrue, right? Like you said, Iran has complied beyond many nations would, especially nations that have histories of US intervention, like coups, assassinations, and sanctions. Iran has consistently complied with the requests of international actors for reporting on its nuclear program, which goes majorly to civilian programs and energy programs. But we've seen in the last month, like this powder keg blow up, where the U.S. is now going full force with claims that Iran is getting ready to strike. Different U.S. pundits have been saying that, even fear mongering here in the U.S., right? Like pandering about this idea that Iran is getting ready to use weapons against the Zionist state of Israel, and after they're done there, they'll come to the U.S. But the fact is that's completely untrue. The only actors in the region that tend to export terror in that way is the Zionist state of Israel and its largest backer, the U.S. So what we saw on June 13th, I believe, so almost actually, I think when this episode is released, it'll be a month ago, that we saw like Israel's war of aggression against Iran escalate. But I think it's important for viewers to know as well that this wasn't the first time we've seen this happen historically, and it definitely wasn't the first time that it's happened since October 2023, since the Al-Aqsa flood, and the Palestinian people broke out of their prison in Gaza. And since then, we've seen resistance in the region, which Iran is a primary supporter of, has maintained, training of Palestinian fighters across the region, and supported them as well. We've seen attacks on Iran, on Lebanon, on Syria, on Iraq, on the entire region for any support to the Palestinian people. And I think that is the fundamental reason we saw this escalation happen last month, right? It wasn't for these false claims of nuclear power, of Iran gaining a nuclear weapon that was going to be used on the people around Iran or anyone else. It was because the U.S. government, its lackey in the region of the Zionist government, are trying to weaken the region as much as possible to make way for their interests. We saw it with the fall of the Syrian government recently. We've seen it with the assassinations of leaders of Hezbollah and the weakening of the resistance in Lebanon as well. So I think that's the fundamental factor here, right, for working people to know, is that it isn't any fear of threat to us, our livelihood, our interests, or anyone else in the world. It's attacks. These attacks are fueled by the threat against U.S. interests and wanting to, I guess, disarm that threat in any way possible, which is why they're striking Iran.
Yeah, I saw a video recently of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and this was a clip from decades ago, where he said Iran is close to having a nuclear weapon. And then they went through and they had him saying it over and over and over again, the same type of thing every several years. And so now they're saying again, oh, Iran's close to having a nuclear weapon. And I don't know, they might be, but it's certainly, he sounds like the little boy that cried wolf. So, I mean, maybe if we can dig a little deeper in here. You've said that the goal here is to weaken part of the resistance, and it seems that Israel's goals have been primarily a land grab, and then the U.S. wants to have control of all aspects of the region. So how does this the bombing first of Israel, but then the U.S., which has said that they wanted to not get entangled in the Middle East. Here they seem to be doing exactly that. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think with regards to Israel specifically, right? So we've seen Israel's like land grab attempts recently, like in recent history, in Syria after the fall of the government in December, I believe, of last year. But that's not the first time that Israel has occupied other Arab lands, right? It has occupied the south of Lebanon. It's occupied Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. So this is just a recurring tactic for the Zionist government. Within occupied Palestine and like historic Palestine specifically, we're seeing preparation for one of the largest annexations of Palestinian land in occupied 67, which is the West Bank. So I think, both for Israel and for the US, this is working in its favor. The US has seen Syrian markets open up to US companies since the fall of the Syrian government in December 2024. That's one of its major goals in the region, is access and domination of the markets. And that's ultimately the goal with Iran, right? Like this isn't new for the US to intervene, whether covertly or overtly, in Iranian affairs. We know that to this day, US sanctions result in crippling harm to the Iranian people and their society. Sanctions on Iranian banks result in basically every area of life being impacted because international exporters aren't willing to export into Iran for fear of secondary sanctions from the US. So this is like a larger project of US imperialism to destabilize Iran with the use of sanctions with overt military force. So they're able to install some kind of government that is more keen to US interests, right? That is why we saw the coup in 1953 that reinstated the Shah after the nationalization of oil in Iran. So anytime US interests are threatened, which any country that doesn't cower to US imperialism is a threat to their interests. So any Arab government, any government in the region that even offers lip service, right, against US imperialism and their domination of the region will be met with extreme force. Even if it's not actual action, the positioning as hostile to the US imperial project in the region is immediately dealt with by the powers. That's why they've had such keen eyes on Iran. It's why I think since even the Iranian Revolution, this weapons of mass destruction lie has been purported over and over again. And the American people are wising up to it, right? We saw after the strikes on Iran about a month ago now, that people immediately flooded the streets because we're watching you named as well, attack after attack in the US, right? We're seeing a mass deportation we're seeing attempts to weaker labor relations at a national and federal scale. We're watching this big, beautiful bill that creates one of the largest ICE and Department of Homeland Security budgets in history. Same with the overall military funding, while stripping away healthcare from millions of Americans. So it's very clear to the American people that when it comes to, and we can always make it more clear, right? That's our goal as organizers. But it is clear to the American people that it is not in our interest to go to war with Iran. It's in the interest of the U.S. ruling class, weapons manufacturers, and those who profit off of death and destruction, which we do not as working people.
Yeah, no. I want to go back to this question of nuclear weapons a little bit, though. But I as you were saying, I wanted to underline one thing you said, because you talked about in the 1950s when there was a democratically elected, I think president was the title, and they nationalized oil in Iran, and the U.S. Backed a coup to overthrow that government. And I remember, because I'm old, in the 1970s when the Shah was overthrown, that was something that Iranian people were citing, that they should have the right to have whatever kind of government they want, and and they remembered that the United States just did a regime change on them, to use the current word. And so my question, though, is the idea of regime change and protecting the sovereignty of your country. It seems like, because the United States military is substantial compared to any in the world. and even in the region, the Israeli military is substantial compared to any other in the region, and they have nuclear weapons as well. And so it seems that the way to protect your sovereignty is to have a nuclear weapon. I know North Korea took that position, and Iraq did not, and we see what happened there. And we've seen that whatever, Syria, Libya. These are countries that have been the government's instability has been created by the United States and others funding it, and they've been overthrown. So it seems to me that if I was a country in that area that wanted to have any opinions separate from U.S. imperialism, I'd want to have a nuclear weapon to protect myself and not to use offensively, but to as a threat to make sure that I was not overthrown. Does that seem right to you as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it's every nation's sovereign right to determine its own affairs, right? And that includes access to nuclear power, right? And like the proliferation of nuclear power. And what Iran has experienced, and I believe there's even been reports of there being internal discussions to this extent. But Iran has complied with all international reporting requests when it comes to its nuclear program. So it did everything it was asked of, and it was still met with this unnecessary and inhumane and unjust war of aggression over the last month. So exactly like you said, why wouldn't they at this point decide to get nuclear weapons and nuclear armament, because they're seeing that the only protection, especially when you have a neighbor as hostile as the state of Israel, right? Because that's a fundamental part of this question is Israel, like you said, is a nuclear power. It hasn't done any international reporting when it comes to its nuclear program. It's still, I believe to this day, I'm not sure if it's actually even admitted that they have nuclear programs and a nuclear weapon, but we know that they do. And they're simultaneously demanding this disarmament of Iran, when showing Iran that the only way you can prevent an Israeli attack, the only way you can prevent U.S. weapons being shipped to bunker buster bombs were recently shipped to the state of Israel to be used on the war against Iran. And the only way to prevent that is by also having a nuclear weapon yourself. I think recently I saw another report about U.S. funding some type of $500 million at least, probably more, into the development of military facilities in Israel, specifically because of these developments with Iran. So it's not like U.S. imperialism is leaving the region and is not going to continue attacking Iran. It's not like the Zionist state will be leaving anytime soon, at the very least, right? We are working to an end of both of these evils. But right now they're there, and the only way that Iran is able to protect itself, its interests, and its people is by also standing strong and having its own nuclear armament program.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Unfortunately, that we live in that kind of world. I wanted to, drill down a little bit more on this too. It seems to me, and I'm not a military expert, and I don't think I'm not expecting you to be either, but that this is, a heck of an opponent to take on too. I mean, we just came out of not that long ago occupation and regime change in Iraq. Which hasn't went so well for the United States or Afghanistan for that matter too. But in the case of Iran, I mean, it's a country that is substantially larger in terms of population and land mass than Iraq. And I'd recently read polling data that said that that the people support the current government and that they are willing to fight for it, at least more so than even in the United States. It seems that, and then geography, again, I'm not a military expert, but because of mountains and other things, it's not so easy just to, it's not as easy to invade Iran as Iraq. And then, as if you if you try to establish a new government and overthrow the old one, that doesn't mean that the people are going along with it. And there's been resistance in each of the countries where this kind of regime change has happened. How do you think that fits into the calculus of U.S. imperialism, and what should we be looking for in terms of Iran, their resistance to imperialism in the near term here?
Yeah, I think the national unity of the Iranian people, like in the face of imperialist aggression, is like something that goes understated a lot. There's always very loud actors that are on the fringes, but the reality is that the Iranian people widely support their government, especially like mainly from the frame of self-determination. It is the Iranian people's own decisions and own direction of how their government and how their affairs go. And I think that, I don't believe the US calculates from any moral perspective, which we all know, right? It calculates based on what's possible and realistic. And I think it is aware that any of the typical, conventional war tactics that it's used in Afghanistan and Iraq with like occupations of these countries is not going to fly in Iran, right? The amount of American military power and manpower that would be required for that to happen is just simply not where we are anymore in the way that US imperialism conducts its affairs. That's why it utilizes like the proxy in the region, which is the state of Israel. Israel is a rabid dog, right? We have seen it attack every single one of its neighbors. We have seen it get increasingly and more hostile to the Palestinian people. So the way that I read it is that the US doesn't have to do too much overtly, right? We're not going to see US troops necessarily deployed, at least I don't think right now, to any ground invasion of Iran. What we're going to see is military and or air and naval support of Israeli attacks on Iran. And I think, Iran has been able to maintain a strong face in response to all these attacks. I think that is like the testament of the unity of the Iranian people right now. We've seen in other countries where, for whatever combination of conditions, weren't able to resist imperialist attacks and regime change. We've named Syria a few times so far, that being one of the clearest ones recently, right, where the US and Israel was able to kind of fragment the people amongst different lines, mainly sectarian lines, and forget like the primary contradiction is that there are intervening forces. There's U.S., Israeli, and Turkish forces that are intervening in the self-determination of the people of the region. I think another country that has shown this well is Yemen. Yemen has maintained its resistance against the Israeli occupation and specifically their siege of the people in Gaza, which Yemen constantly names. Every time Nasrallah strikes a ship or does any type of action, it names again and again that as long as the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people of Gaza, are starving, and aid is being prevented from the hands of children and families and mothers, that they will continue to siege the Red Sea, right? And I think that is another testament of like the unity of the Yemeni people in the project, like in the national project and the protection of the Palestinian people in Palestine. So while I don't think, like the US is going to stop at all in its attempts to attack Yemen, we've seen its bombardment of Yemen, right? Which I believe ended maybe a month or so ago, but from March to I have to double check, but I want to say between March and May of this year, there is strikes daily on Yemen for its resistance to the Israeli occupation and its siege on Gaza. But Yemen still stands the same way that Iran, after almost a month of like unjust aggression, was able to stand tall and is maintaining its national objectives to resisting imperialism.
No, it's impressive that this group of resistance, and really all the people of the region, and even people of conscience all over the world, have supported the Palestinians and have stood up against imperialism, and Iran has been at the forefront of that. I want to just raise one more thing about Iran, though. It looks like, and a lot of people are speculating that they're going to pull out of the non-proliferation treaty, which they've signed on to and been a part of. And it seems that this is, that the actions of U.S. imperialism in Israel have not made us safer, have not made us any better off. That, I look back to, I know Obama had negotiated some kind of a temporary truce with Iran, so that they wouldn't, they wouldn't try to develop nuclear weapons. And there was some, issues with sanctions. And, when Trump took office the first time, he immediately, threw out that treaty. And as a result, we are, because it hadn't been ratified. As a result, we're in this situation now where, there is nuclear proliferation in terms of, and as you've mentioned, it makes sense to, if you want to preserve the sovereignty. So all these things have made us, the world so much more dangerous than it was not that long ago. But I want to circle back to Palestine here, which is probably the core of issue of the resistance. And you're the chair of the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network. And so, could you give us a little bit of, what's going on in Gaza, and for that matter, the West Bank and other parts of Palestine right now, and what does that look like? It's fallen out of the news somewhat because of, because Trump does bombastic things every day, and including bombing Iran. But could you talk a little bit about what's going on in Palestine right now and what that looks like?
Absolutely. So, listeners know, since October 7th, 2023, since the Unified Palestinian Resistance launched Al-Aqsa Flood, there has been just nonstop bombardment and besiegement of the Palestinian people in Gaza. This has been ongoing, I believe, for over 640 days now, right? Where on almost a daily basis, besides the brief periods of ceasefires that have happened and prisoner exchanges that have happened, the Palestinian people have been facing complete destruction of every aspect of infrastructure. There's not a single hospital in Gaza that is functioning the way it should be to care for the wounded. There's, a recorded, the count has stayed the same for so long because the Gaza Health Ministry isn't able to record all the bodies, access all the bodies of our martyrs. But, a recorded 57,000 Palestinians have been martyred in this time. And those are martyrs from direct bombardment, airstrikes, or direct massacre in that way. What's not recorded in that is the Palestinians who were being martyred after they wither away from a lack of food, from a lack of medicine. I think in the last month we saw the first Palestinian adult be martyred by malnutrition. We're seeing still to this day virtual total siege of Gaza. Nothing is coming in besides these the Gaza Humanitarian Fund aid, which is being used almost as a tool to further massacre the Palestinian people. In the last month, we also saw, these U.S. military contractors celebrating after shooting Palestinians at 8 checkpoints. I believe one of them said "hell yeah, boy," or something along the lines after shooting a Palestinian. We're seeing Israeli soldiers doing that, which we already knew they were doing this, but confirming in Israeli media that yes, they're being instructed to shoot Palestinian aid seekers at these checkpoints as well. And in the midst of all this, the Palestinian people are standing strong, are demanding not a are demanding our own conditions in a ceasefire agreement, right, are not willing to cater to the U.S. or Israeli hopes for upcoming ceasefire negotiations, specifically are demanding a full withdrawal, like they have continuously demanded, a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, a complete and total lifting of the siege on Gaza, which existed before October 2023. And that's just Gaza, right? In the occupied West Bank, we've seen the virtual uh, cleansing of villages in the West Bank, including Tulkarm refugee camps, I believe refugee camps in Jenin as well. That's thousands of Palestinians who've been forced to leave their homes. And I want to highlight that these are Palestinians who are already living in refugee camps, right? These aren't Palestinians who were settled in any way. Most Palestinians who still live in Palestine are internally displaced to some degree. They're not living in their original villages, and that was true for the refugee camps in the West Bank that have been virtually cleansed by the occupation. And daily, there's settler raids, with one just happening, I believe, yesterday in Palestine, leading to the death, the martyrdom of two Palestinians, including a Palestinian American citizen here from Florida, from Tampa. We're watching, the collaboration between the Palestinian Authority, the Comprador Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli occupation forces in the occupied West Bank as well, resulting in over 15,000 Palestinians who've been arrested since October 2023 alone, majority of them under administrative detention without charge or trial. And again, in the midst of all that, the resistance forces in the West Bank are still holding strong, are still fighting against the occupation. But it brings the question of how much can the Palestinian people take? That is why here in Jacksonville, we organize in the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network to demand a total end to U.S. aid and U.S. weapons to the Zionist state of Israel. We do part of that through upholding our campaigns at Jacksport, which here in Jacksonville, for folks who don't know, we're kind of a coastal city here in Northeast Florida. We have the St. Johns River flowing through. Ports are one of our greatest. We're actually the largest port in Florida. So we take quite a lot of imports, export a lot. It's a port that has agreements with the Department of Defense. So it also facilitates military shipments. And we have a campaign at Jacksport specifically to end genocide, being shipped out of Jacksport. So that means we're targeting Zim, which is an Israeli logistics company. It's one that was created during Al-Nakba and has always had a history of arming the Zionist state. We're demanding a complete termination of all contracts with Zim and Jacksport. We also, part of that campaign is demanding the suspension of all Maersk contracts. Maersk is the largest logistics and shipping company that is responsible for transporting weapons to the Zionist state. And we're demanding a suspension of those contracts until Maersk ends all military contracts with the Department of Defense and all military contracts with the Zionist state of Israel. Because we don't believe our ports, our longshoremen, anybody in our community should be responsible for having to transport actual weapons of mass destruction, right? We hear these lies of Iran, Iraq, all these people having weapons of mass destruction when it's the US that benefits, profits, and proliferates these weapons across the world, which we've seen used in Palestine without mercy over the last 2 years. And just to give personal context, I'm from Tulkarm. My family is from the village of Tulkarm. So watching our village be completely ethnically cleansed, losing family members, having martyrs in our family, watching the imprisonment and administrative detention of our loved ones. This is an experience that all Palestinians are experiencing right now, whether you're from Gaza, from Tulkarm, from Jenin, or from Al-Quds. We've been watching an escalation of the the violence and inhumanity of the Zionist occupation to a way that little remember. Like even some Nakba is referred to as the catastrophe. And we've watched more Palestinians be dispossessed since the Nakba in these last 2 years. We've watched more Palestinians be martyred since the Nakba in these 2 years. And yeah, I think the hope in all of this has been the ability of the Palestinian resistance and the resistance in the region to stand strong, and the resistance globally, right? Like I, as a Palestinian living in this country my entire life, have never seen the outpouring of support for Palestine that we see today, right? Never in my life did I expect to be walking at some like nearby coffee shop and seeing somebody I've never met before in a kafia and being able to talk to them and build community and invite them into organizing, right? So I say that to ground like all the loss in the fact that there is such a strong support for Palestine across the world now that has never previously existed. And I think that's part of the kind of like ingredients we need to see an end to Zionism in our lifetimes. So as painful as this moment, as this time has been, it's also incredibly inspiring to see that like liberation truly is in our future.
Yes. Well, there's a lot there that you just said. And so, well, let me start by giving my condolences on behalf of Fight Back Radio to you, your village, your family, and all the Palestinians that have suffered over, I could say the last few years, but you can go back to, the whole 20th century as well, the Balfour Agreement and et cetera. So this all didn't start in October 2023. This has been going on for more than a century. And so let me give, condolences for that. But, and the resistance is working too. I'll say that too. I just read recently Maersk is backpedaling. So your work about them transporting weapons is working because I read in the papers just that they're talking about, well, we're not sure about Israel, etc. So that kind of thing seems to be working. But let me ask you a little bit about the actual conditions a little bit in Israel, and then I'll come back to the United States. Israel and the occupied territories. So I read also the article you did about the settlers that killed two people. One was an American, one was, and he was visiting family over there, so probably somebody like you, or where settlers just came and killed the two of them. There was, ambulance. I read this in the Guardian, but there was ambulance were coming, and then the settlers blocked the ambulances so they couldn't get there, and then both of them died. And I think, could you talk a little bit about who, these settlers, who they are, for people that aren't as familiar with Palestine? I mean, it seems like that would, if you did that in my neighborhood, it just somebody would come and arrest you for murder. I would hope, but there's no talk about. In fact, the family was calling for an investigation. I read, which means that there's not an investigation. And how could something like that happen? And what's going on there?
Yeah. So. Two martyrs, were brutally beaten by settlers. One of them, Saif Musala, I believe, was a Palestinian American citizen from Florida, from Tampa, Florida, and he was brutally beaten to death. The other martyr, Mohammed Shalabi, I believe, was brutally beaten and then shot by settlers, right? So this brutality takes like multiple forms. And this practice of settlers being emboldened by Israeli soldiers is not new. Whether it's like Israeli soldiers watching or even supporting settlers and blocking ambulances from getting to Palestinians, that is unfortunately a common occurrence, as is the the reality, and you can find videos and photos of this all over online, right? Watching settlers brutally beating Palestinians, setting fire to olive groves. And you'll watch the soldiers there standing on guard to protect the settlers. That is the whole purpose of the Zionist project, is to dispossess the Palestinian people by any means necessary. So why would the soldiers ever stop the settlers in doing so, right? It's sanctioned violence, even if it doesn't come from the state, when it comes to settler violence against the Palestinian people. And I want to say this isn't new, right? Like, I think that there's been at least 5 Palestinians who hold American citizenship that have been martyred in the last year or so, in the occupied West Bank when they visit family, whether it's by settlers or Israeli soldiers themselves. I believe just last year there was another Palestinian from Florida who was shot and killed by Israeli occupation soldiers. So, and every single time, we maybe will see a statement from one House representative, right? If I think like a New Jersey House representative issued a statement condemning the killing of one of the Palestinian martyrs who held American citizenship. But widely, right, there's no policy change. There's not even like lip service condemnation of this attack on Palestinians, because they're Palestinian, because we're Palestinians. I think that's what a lot of us have learned, if we didn't already understand that, was that American citizenship does not protect us, especially when we're going, like, for specifically speaking of Palestinians, when we visit our home, the citizenship we hold doesn't protect us, right? I think of American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered, like martyred, shot dead by Israeli occupation soldiers, and who held an American passport. So I think this is, again, like the function of the Israeli government, right? They are trying to annex as much Palestinian land as possible. The easiest way to do that is to remove Palestinians from our land. So by any means necessary, they do that, whether it's throwing us in administrative and arbitrary detention, or it's forcing us to flee, or massacring us. So yeah, I think what we've seen, like with and just to add to, for people who may not know, the Trump administration has literally, I believe, sent rifles to Israeli settlers since taking office, right? Like specifically starting programs that arm Israeli settlers to use against Palestinians. So again, like this is not a new practice, but it has absolutely been emboldened since the start of this escalated genocide. Because the same way we're seeing this global outpouring of support for Palestine, so is the Zionist government. They're seeing that as well. They know they have staunch support in their imperialist backers, but when it comes to popular and mass support, Israel has none of that across the world, right? So they're lashing out. They're trying to reach their aims as fast as possible, as violently as possible, and that's why it's our role as like people of conscience across this world, to fight back with everything in our being to make sure that Israel is not able to continue things as normal as it has.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you think about if there was some white American who was killed by while the soldiers in Venezuela or China or any country like that, there would be outrage. Trump would be on television, threatening and all kinds of things like that. And the racism of this, as well as reinforcing imperial goals over the goals of people, is evident. So. Could you talk a little bit about, when Trump was in office the first time, I remember he, early on, he tried to do a travel ban to Muslim countries, and we were successful at beating that back, through protests and courts and other things. But as a Palestinian living in Jacksonville, I mean, Trump is, he's attacked, as you mentioned, we have ICE raids on immigrants. There's all kinds of things going on. Can you talk a little bit about the repression that Arabs are feeling and what it's like to be an Arab American in the United States in 2025?
Absolutely. So I think like specifically going with the mass deportation effort that like the Trump administration has launched, we saw like some of the first iterations of this being deportation as tools of political repression. Watching the Trump administration target Mahmoud Khalil, who was released, I think, about a month ago now. I think about a month ago now.
This is the Columbia University student activist who was on a green card, I believe. He had a green card and had a wife and a kid, and was just kidnapped and sent to, I think, Louisiana, to New Orleans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so please go on.
No, thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, Mahmoud Khalil is a Columbia graduate student who was abducted by ICE agents, federal agents, on Women's Day, actually on March 8th. And I remember this just so clearly because I thought it was just like a great example, for lack of better terms, of what this country offers, like working women and women of oppressed nationalities. Like Mahmoud Khalil's wife, right? Like her gift on International Women's Day while being, I think, like 8 months or 7 months pregnant at the time was the abduction of her husband from their home and the denial of her husband being with her when she gave birth to their first child, Dean, in May. And that was just, the first iteration. Mahmoud Khalil was not the only Palestinian supporter who was targeted by ICE for deportation. We saw, I think, Badr Consori, we saw Ramesia Ozturk, we saw, and I'm just listing names, but all these people were students targeted from the student movement for their support for Palestine. I believe that, I can't remember who went where, but I believe one was like a Georgetown student. And then we just recently, I think July 4th weekend, so last weekend, saw the release of another Palestinian woman, Ward Sekik, who was abducted by ICE after returning from her honeymoon, and was just recently released after 3 months in ICE detention. Likat Cordia, another Palestinian student from Texas, is still currently in ICE detention. So across the board, we've watched like the Trump administration target the Palestinian solidarity movement in multiple ways, whether it's targeting us for deportation, advancing different laws that criminalize support for Palestine, even like more, I don't want to use, I guess, like liberal forms of resistance, right? Like BDS, like the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. Florida actually just got another set of laws that criminalizes BDS in I believe public sector positions. So we're watching like these attacks on a broad scale across all of our communities, and we're watching how they impact all of us at the same time. In Jacksonville, I've heard countless stories of family members who are worried about leaving the country to visit family right now because they're worried about getting back in. So they're canceling international travel plans. Other family members or like families in our community who have legal status, but maybe are just fearful because it seems that even with legal status, that doesn't offer any protections now. They're targeting legal permanent residents, like you named with Mahmoud Khalil. So they're scared to go and get any medical care. They're scared to go to their basic appointments. The type of fear that this administration has stoked in our communities is something, I remember organizing through the first Trump administration, and without like being sensational about it, it wasn't like this, right? The fear and the attacks are real. And that's why it requires us to seriously organize ourselves and able to like prevent these attacks from harming our community and organize ourselves towards a better future as well.
Yeah, let me follow up on that a little bit. So, I mean, you said, you're a founding member of the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network, and you currently serve as the chair. Can you talk a little bit about, like over time, you mentioned the running into somebody at a coffee shop with a keffiyeh that you don't know. What does it look like organizing now, as opposed to maybe just even a few, 3-4 years ago? Around this issue, around Palestine and issues of justice in the Middle East, and can you talk a little bit about that, about what organizing looks like right now?
Absolutely. So the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network was founded in late 2017. So we've been organizing for some time now in Jacksonville, and I remember our measurement if an action was successful, like back in the day, it would be like if we got like 50 people to attend a protest for Palestine. That would be our okay, this is a good expectation, it's realistic. And we'd be ecstatic if we got more. If we got a little bit less, we'd still be happy because it was such a new issue to organize around in Jacksonville. And then if you flash back to late 2023, early 2024, we were bringing out thousands of community members with a large participation of the Art of American community here to the streets to protest for Palestine. So I think just that shows a significant difference in how our community has developed its awareness and understanding of what Palestine means to Jacksonville, and our communities here, even if they're not Palestinian or Arab, right? We've seen it, as the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network, a large portion of our work isn't just organizing for Palestine or against imperialist attacks on other nations. It's also for organizing solidarity amongst working class people in our neighborhoods, in our community, right? Making the connection between our struggles here and the struggles of working class people abroad, making it clear that we come from the same class, right? And that we have more in common with working people in Iran or families in Gaza than you do with the people like the Elon Musks of the world, the Donald Trumps of the world, who are seeking to rob us blind. And I think from that specific angle as well, the type of solidarity we've seen develop is something I will never take for granted, and none of our organizers do. I think of a local organization, the Metro Gardens Neighborhood Association is a organization in Brentwood. It's a historically Black neighborhood, working class. They're fighting a fight against a morgue that's being put right across a school and right across from neighbors' front yards. And one of the leaders of this organization, Miss Lydia Bell, shout out to Miss Bell if you end up listening to this podcast. She now, she'll lead chants on microphones chanting "Free Palestine," right? And this is an older Black woman who's been in the fight for her community for a long time and maybe wasn't always clear on what connections these what people typically refer to as just international issues have to her struggle here and our struggles here, but now it's clear, right? And I think that part of how solidarity and resistance has developed in the US is personally my favorite part, right? I've been in national organizing spaces amongst Palestinians and Arabs since 2017 as well. And while that will always hold a special place in my heart, right? Because this is our national struggle. There's something that is incredibly encouraging and maintains hope and focus on the future when I see people who are not Palestinian take up the mantle, take up the struggle for a free Palestine. So seeing the developments here has been wonderful, truly.
Yeah, no, that's good. Let me follow up a little bit with that, and that is inspiring. Thank you for that. I want to ask you about this. I said at the top about how Trump is moving from this outrageous thing to that, and you mentioned a list of things, and the big ugly bill or beautiful bill or whatever it is that the budget that just passed that talks about taking away rights of organized labor, mass transit, education, whatever. But it increases the defense budget by 18%, I think, and gives huge tax cuts to rich people. These are attacks, as you just talked about, on working people. Could you talk a little bit about how you try to connect, or if you try to connect these different struggles in a battle against Trump? I think there's been some of this coming together. Whatever, there's been the No Kings marches and other things around the country that have brought people of different politics together and different views just on a basic human level. How do you approach that kind of thing?
Yeah. I would say here in Jacksonville, we have a really great coalition here. Part of the coalition is, of course, JPSN, JCAC, or the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network, and other organizations, including 5051. And I think since Trump's inauguration, we've seen a resurgence of an anti-Trump movement. And the way that we've connected with them is exactly like you named, right? Is pointing out that the priorities of this administration is not working people. It's not protecting our families' access to healthcare or making healthcare more accessible. It's not addressing here in Florida, where Jacksonville is the eviction capital of the state. So thinking about even local leaders, we're not seeing their attempts to make housing more affordable so families aren't getting evicted and then brutalized by cops when they are. And one of the clearest connections has been, I think, actually this big ugly bill, as you said it, has been that this bill is not only giving enormous tax breaks to the ruling and the most wealthy in this country, the ruling class and the most wealthy in this country. It's also taking Medicaid away from millions, I think at least hundreds of thousands, but millions of Americans. And this is already the healthcare you access when you have no other avenue for accessing healthcare, right? So it's stripping away basic human rights and necessities from working people, while also telling us that it's trying to drain the swamp or institute some kind of the whole Doge thing, right? Institute some kind of accountability over government waste. When in reality, all the Trump administration wants to do is make the government work better in favor of his interests and his billionaire buddies' interests, right? And I think it's been quite easy to make those connections with people in our experience here in Jacksonville. When they see that, our state funds, in terms of tax dollars, billions of dollars a year to the Zionist state of Israel, and how much that money could be reinvested in our communities, it's a very easy connection to make. And in our campaign for Genocide of Jacksport, we're actually researching and canvassing the neighborhoods around Jacksport to learn about their biggest concerns, what is actually being invested in their communities and what isn't. And learning about how, Jacksport has the ability to give investment to the neighborhood around it. The city is able to facilitate that investment in the neighborhoods around the port. But instead, they'd rather write that off with new contracts and benefits to Maersk and Zim and to different companies that operate the port, or the CEO of Jacksport, right? So making those clear connections with our community has proven successful for us, to make the connections a little bit clearer cut. And last thing, even more recently, a report came out where it showed, I think, we have 19 city councilors in Jacksonville. I think the report showed that 12 of those city councilors, all Republicans, are millionaires, right? And for a city that is extremely diverse, an extremely working class city too, like Jacksonville is, nothing demonstrates that contradiction clearer than having the people who've been working against our campaigns for a ceasefire resolution, for an end to morgue in Black neighborhoods, for a budget that actually serves the people, are just pocketing all the extra change they're getting from the developers who are lobbying them for these different projects. So yeah, I think it has been quite successful at like making the connections between Palestine, the way the US invests in imperialism versus the way the US invests in communities at home.
Yeah. So let me ask you also about, I know you're a leftist. You're a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. You're a revolutionary. Could you tell me, let me ask about Freedom Road. I mean, can you tell me how that organization informs, your outlook and your activism a little bit, and why you joined them in the first place?
Absolutely. So I joined Freedom Road in 2017. I joined fairly young, and I joined after just meeting members of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization through community organizing, and seeing that out of, and at this point, there's fairly like no community organizations in Jacksonville. Like there is kind of like more affinity group formings versus like actual pen to paper organizations. And what I admired was like the discipline and the consistency of the members of Freedom Road I met, right? They were at the front lines every single time. They were connecting with family members who had lost their loved ones to police violence. They were leading the fight against the corrupt state attorney, Angela Corey. And at the time, I was a young 19-year-old person who is chronically online. So I was researching a lot about socialism, right? I was like, capitalism feels wrong to me, right? So I started looking to other systems. And it wasn't until I met actual members of Freedom Road that they, one, were able to help me with like my political development, right? Like actually gave me some readings to make sense of what I was feeling, what I've noticed and experienced, right? And after, studying the program of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and specifically its strategy for revolution, was for me what was the ceiling factor, right? I want to be in an organization that's rooted in action, and plans on, uniting the multinational working class, with organized labor that has like actual plans for how we're going to get to a point of liberation in our society, because we know that this is not the way to live. We're getting closer and closer to that point where people are absolutely no longer able to live in the old way, and it's our job to chart the path to the new way. So for me, being a member of Freedom Road for God, almost a decade at this point, which feels crazy to say. It's like an honor to say, but feels crazy too, is because I want to, I think the largest testament to the success of our organizing here in Jacksonville has been the commitment that Freedom Road has taught a lot of us who organize here. It's that, revolution is a daily affair. This isn't something you can pick up and put down. It requires commitment. It requires clarity. It requires connection with the masses of the people. It requires us to be part of that and help lead the masses of our people towards revolution. And for me, it's the only option. I've been in different formations. I have organized in the national struggle, through the Palestinian youth movement, which I think does great work, right? I think national organizations do phenomenal work in organizing our people towards national liberation. But I fundamentally believe, the way to ensure national liberation for the majority of oppressed nations in this world is through tackling like the belly of the beast, right? Tackling US imperialism and ensuring that we shift the course, that we put working people in power of our own destiny, and no longer are sacrificed at the altar of profit for capitalists. So Freedom Road, please, is the guiding star to frame it that way in my political organizing.
Oh, that's great. That might be a good way to end it, but I want to give you a chance, as we're winding down here, if there's anything else we haven't talked about or any other points you want to make before we end the interview.
Yeah, I think I would just like The only thing I would ask folks to do is, get involved in an organization if you aren't already. More likely than not, there's organizations around you fighting for an end to the genocide in Palestine and for Palestinian liberation as a whole. And I would encourage folks, Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network is a proud member of the Anti-War Action Network. I would encourage folks to visit antiwaractionnetwork.org and learn more about AWAN, get involved with AWAN as a member of our network. You just have to do some of the national days of action, which are really successful, and we've been really successful in putting on. Agree to the guidelines and the guiding principles of the Anti-War Action Network, and get connected with folks nationally who are seeking to build a fighting anti-war movement. And if you're local to Jacksonville, if you visit jaxpsn.org, you can sign our petition for genocide off Jacksport. We're trying to get to at least 5,000 signatures before we head to Jacksport board and lay them down on the table to make it clear that the people of Jacksonville want better. And you can join us as well if you visit our website. We're always taking new members. We have grown exponentially so in the last 2 years, which, out of grief, but also like people need to get organized, and we're getting organized. So if you are not already one of those people who are organized, just find an organization near you, join the Anti-War Action Network, or have your organization join the Anti-War Action Network. And if you're in Jacksonville and we haven't met you yet, please come out to a future Jax PSN event, which you can find on our website.
Yes, that's fabulous. We'll put all of those things in the show notes. And our editor, Shane Tremley, who's from Jacksonville, you'll make sure that he does this.
Yeah.
And so I'm calling you out, Shane, on Fight Back Radio. But he does a great job every episode, so I don't. We're lucky to have him. Yes, and so thank you so much, Sara, for being our guest on Fight Back Radio.
Of course. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, so then I want to underline some of what Sara just said. Get active. Get active in the anti-war network, or get active in whatever it is, whether it's your union or your neighborhood organization. It's like we need to stand up and fight against all the attacks that Trump's doing on us. And particularly Sara did such a great job outlining what's going on in the Middle East with Iran and Palestine and the rest of it. And hopefully that inspired you, because the tragedy that's happening over there and the tragedies that are happening in our cities and rural areas of the United States can only be solved by us. They're going to keep coming at us until we push back and until we eventually win. And so I encourage people to get involved in whatever it is. We're just coming out of June, which was Pride Month, was Juneteenth Day. We had marches on the 4th of July. We need to keep it up. It's not time to take a break. We need to keep the fight going, to keep calling people out and building our strength. And if we do, if we organize, if we fight, we're going to win. I'm confident of that. So thank you all for that. We'll put Sara's what she mentioned in the show notes, so you can click on those and get involved, and you should definitely do that. Before we leave, I want to, as always, thank our production team, which is, as I mentioned, Shane Tremley. It's also Lane Dorsey, Dodd McColgan, and Caetano Silvera. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people. Yeah, usually I don't leave the guest on for that last little bit. I should turn this off too. Otherwise we might show up some of this. Okay. Yeah, otherwise some of, as I mentioned earlier, they like to do that.